Hello, and welcome to Ironwad Whispers, your corner where stories come alive and speak to the soul. Let us know in the comment where you're listening from. I'd love to see our community grow and connect worldwide. And if you enjoy this story, be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss a story. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Once upon a time, a powerful billionaire thought he was trading loyalty for passion when he fell into the arms of a seductive mistress. What he never imagined was that this woman hadn't come to love him at all, but to destroy everything he had built. Frederick John stood in the owner's box of the Detroit Lions Stadium, watching his team dominate the field below. The roar of 70,000 fans filled the air as his quarterback threw another touchdown pass. At 45, Frederick had built an empire worth over $1 billion, centered around his beloved football franchise. He had purchased the struggling team 10 years ago and transformed it into a championship contender. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife, Doris. "The baby kicked today. Wish you were here to feel it." Frederick glanced at the message and slipped the phone back into his pocket without responding. 7 months pregnant with their first child, Doris had been trying to reconnect with him for weeks. But his attention was elsewhere, focused on the auburn-haired woman who had just entered his private box, her emerald dress catching the stadium lights. Abigail Leonard had started working for the Lions organization just 3 months ago as the new director of player relations. Her credentials were impeccable: Harvard MBA, experience with 2 other NFL franchises, and recommendations that sparkled. But it wasn't her resume that had caught Frederick's attention. It was the way she commanded every room she entered, the way she spoke about football strategy with a passion that matched his own. "Magnificent game tonight," Abigail said, moving to stand beside him at the glass. Her perfume was subtle but intoxicating. "Thompson's completion rate is up 12% since we adjusted his training regimen." Frederick nodded, acutely aware of her proximity. At home, Doris would be eating dinner alone again. But here in the stadium, with the lights and the crowds and Abigail's presence, he felt more alive than he had in years. The conference room at the Lions training facility hummed with activity even at midnight. Frederick and Abigail sat across from each other, laptops open, discussing draft picks for the upcoming season. Empty coffee cups littered the table between them. These late-night sessions had become routine over the past month, always justified by urgent team business. "You know," Abigail said, stretching her arms above her head, "my ex-husband never understood why I worked these kinds of hours. He said I cared more about football than family." She laughed, but there was something vulnerable in her eyes. Frederick found himself leaning forward. "His loss," he said quietly. "Not everyone can appreciate true dedication." Their hands were inches apart on the table, and neither of them moved away. Doris John sat in her obstetrician's waiting room, checking her phone for the 5th time. Frederick had promised to make this appointment. They were finding out the baby's gender today. Another text sent. Another text ignored. A nurse called her name, and she walked in alone, fighting back tears she refused to shed in public. Meanwhile, Frederick was at a sports bar in downtown Detroit with Abigail, watching college games and scouting potential draft picks. "I should probably head home," he said half-heartedly as the 4th quarter began. Abigail placed her hand on his arm. "Stay," she said simply. "This quarterback from Michigan State is exactly what we've been looking for." He stayed, and later told Doris that an emergency team meeting had run late. It was the first of many lies. 2 weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and fabricated excuses. Frederick found himself inventing team crises that required Abigail's immediate attention. They traveled to scout players, attended league meetings, always maintaining professional boundaries in public while the air between them crackled with unspoken tension. Doris, now in her 8th month, had stopped calling. She moved through their massive estate like a ghost, preparing the nursery alone, attending doctor's appointments, with only her sister for company. When friends asked about Frederick, she smiled and made excuses. The owner of a football team was a busy man, after all. But late at night, she lay awake wondering when she had become invisible to the man who once promised her the world. The Lions were playing their biggest rival on Thursday Night Football. The corporate boxes were filled with sponsors, league officials, and potential investors. Frederick moved through the crowd with practiced ease, Abigail at his side in a professional capacity. To observers, they were the perfect example of owner and executive, discussing statistics and strategies. But Doris watched from home, her hand on her swollen belly, as the camera panned across the owner's box. She saw the way Abigail leaned in to whisper something in Frederick's ear, saw his laugh, saw the brief touch of hands as they reached for the same drink. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her distress. She turned off the television and called her lawyer, not for divorce, not yet, but for information. Just in case. It happened after the Lions' victory over their division rivals. The team was heading to the playoffs, and the celebration in the locker room was electric. Frederick and Abigail found themselves alone in his office, champagne glasses in hand, the muffled sounds of celebration filtering through the walls. "We make a good team," Abigail said, moving closer. The space between them evaporated, and suddenly Frederick was kissing her, months of restraint crumbling in an instant. When they finally broke apart, he was breathless. "I can't stop thinking about you," he admitted. Abigail's smile was triumphant. "Then don't," she whispered. That night, Frederick didn't go home. He sent Doris a text about an emergency flight to meet with league officials. Another lie. Another step toward the precipice. Frederick woke in Abigail's downtown penthouse, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Reality crashed over him like a cold wave. His pregnant wife was at home, probably worried sick, while he lay in another woman's bed. He reached for his phone, finding 12 missed calls from Doris and a single text, "The baby and I are fine," in case you were wondering. Abigail emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in silk. "Regrets already?" she asked, reading his expression. "It's complicated," Frederick said, sitting up. "Doris is pregnant." Abigail's expression didn't change. "I know," she said simply. "But are you happy? When was the last time you felt alive like you did last night?" The question hung in the air as Frederick's phone rang again. This time, it was his lawyer. 3 days later, Frederick sat across from Doris at their kitchen table. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but her voice was steady. "I know about her," she said simply. "I don't know details, and I don't want them. But I know." Frederick couldn't meet her eyes. The weight of his betrayal sat heavy in the room between them. "I'm giving you a choice," Doris continued, her hand protective over her belly. "Your family, or your whatever she is, you have until this baby is born to decide. 6 weeks, Frederick. After that, if you're not fully committed to us, I'm gone." She stood with difficulty, her pregnancy making every movement labored. "I deserve better than this," she said quietly before leaving the room. Frederick sat alone, the ticking of the kitchen clock suddenly deafening. For 2 weeks, Frederick attempted to balance both worlds. He attended some prenatal appointments, brought Doris flowers, tried to resurrect the husband he used to be. But every moment felt forced, especially when his phone buzzed with messages from Abigail. The mistress was patient, understanding, never pushing but always available. At the team facility, their professional relationship remained intact on the surface. But stolen glances, brushed shoulders, and late-night texts told a different story. Abigail had a way of making every interaction feel charged with possibility. "I can wait," she told him one evening as they reviewed player contracts. I know what I want, and I'm very good at getting it." The confidence in her voice sent shivers down his spine. Unknown to Frederick, Doris had hired a private investigator. Not for divorce proceedings. She meant what she said about giving him a chance, but for protection. Something about Abigail Leonard didn't sit right. The woman had appeared in their lives at too convenient a time, and her background, while impressive on paper, had some interesting gaps. The investigator, a former FBI agent named Marcus Webb, began digging into Abigail's past. Her Harvard credentials checked out, as did her previous employment. But there were inconsistencies, gaps in her employment history that didn't match her resume. Former colleagues who remembered her differently than her references suggested. And most intriguingly, a sealed court case from 5 years ago involving a prominent businessman in Chicago. The Lions' first playoff game was a media circus. Frederick stood on the sideline before kickoff, the weight of expectations heavy on his shoulders. This was what he had worked for, a championship run with the team he'd rebuilt from the ground up. Abigail stood nearby, clipboard in hand, every inch the professional executive. In the owner's box, Doris made a rare public appearance, 9 months pregnant and glowing despite everything. The cameras loved her, the devoted wife supporting her husband's team. She played the part perfectly, even as her heart broke a little more with each passing minute. When the Lions won in overtime, Frederick's celebration was caught on national television, and so was the moment Abigail threw her arms around him in congratulation. Doris went into labor during the second playoff game. She called Frederick 17 times as contractions ripped through her body. Her sister held her hand in the hospital room while her husband stood on a sideline 500 miles away. The baby came fast, a healthy boy with his father's eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. Frederick didn't see his son take his first breath. He was in the air, flying back from the away game, his phone turned off. It was Abigail who told him, showing him the news alert on her tablet. Billionaire team owner becomes father during historic playoff run. His face went white. In his obsession with Abigail and football, he had missed the birth of his child. Some lines, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. Frederick arrived at the hospital to find Doris holding their son, her sister standing guard like a sentinel. "His name is James," Doris said quietly, not looking up from the baby's face. "James William John." Frederick reached out tentatively, and after a long moment, Doris placed the baby in his arms. The weight of his son, the reality of what he'd almost thrown away, hit him like a physical blow. "I'm sorry," he whispered, but Doris shook her head. "Don't apologize to me. Apologize to him. He deserved to have his father there." She was already packing her things, her movements efficient despite her exhaustion. "I'm going to stay with my sister for a while. You can visit James, but I need space." Frederick wanted to protest, but the steel in her voice stopped him. He had made his choices. Now he had to live with them. The estate felt cavernous without Doris and James. Frederick wandered through rooms that had once been filled with laughter and promise. The nursery stood ready, painted in soft blues and greens, stuffed animals waiting for a baby who wasn't coming home. He poured himself whiskey and stood at the window, watching the snow fall on the grounds. Abigail called 3 times that night. He let it go to voicemail each time. Her messages were carefully worded, professional concern mixed with personal undertones. "The team needs you focused for the championship game," she said in the last one. "I need you focused." But for the first time in months, Frederick wasn't thinking about football or Abigail. He was thinking about his son's tiny fingers and the way they had wrapped around his thumb. Marcus Webb sat across from Doris in her sister's living room, a thick folder on the coffee table between them. "Abigail Leonard is not who she claims to be," he began, his voice grave. Her real name is Abigail Thornton. 5 years ago, she was involved in a corporate espionage case in Chicago. The details were sealed, but I have contacts. Doris held James closer, her mind racing. What kind of espionage? Webb opened the folder, revealing photographs and documents. She seduced the CEO of a major pharmaceutical company, gained access to trade secrets, and sold them to a competitor. The company lost hundreds of millions. She escaped prosecution through a plea deal, but she's done this before, Mrs. John. Your husband isn't her first target. Super Bowl Sunday arrived, with all the fanfare of a national holiday. The Lions had made it to the biggest stage in football, and Frederick should have been ecstatic. Instead, he felt hollow. He stood on the field during warm-ups, the magnitude of the moment dampened by the absence of his family. Doris hadn't responded to his invitation to attend the game. Abigail appeared at his elbow, radiant in team colors. "This is your moment," she said, squeezing his arm. "Everything you've worked for." But as Frederick looked around the stadium, at the thousands of fans wearing his team's jersey, he realized that the victory would mean nothing if he had no one to share it with. His phone buzzed with a message from Doris. "James and I are watching. Win this one for him." The Lions won the Super Bowl in a nail-biting finish. Confetti rained down as players embraced on the field. Frederick held the trophy high, cameras flashing from every angle. It should have been the greatest moment of his professional life. Abigail was there in the celebration, her arms around him as champagne sprayed everywhere. The photos would be on every sports page in America. But as the initial euphoria faded, Frederick found himself searching the crowd for a face that wasn't there. He thought about his son, just weeks old, watching with eyes that couldn't yet focus on the television. He thought about Doris, alone with her sister, the woman who had supported his dream to buy the team in the first place. The trophy felt heavy in his hands, its gleam somehow tarnished. 2 days after the Super Bowl, Abigail made her move. She appeared at Frederick's office with a proposal, not romantic but business. "I've been approached by an investment group," she said, placing documents on his desk. "They want to buy a minority stake in the Lions. The valuation is extraordinary. $2 billion for 30%. You'd still maintain control, but the capital injection could transform the franchise." Frederick studied the papers, his business instincts engaged despite his personal turmoil. The offer was indeed generous, almost too good to be true. "Who are these investors?" he asked. Abigail smiled. "International consortium, very discreet, very professional, but they need an answer soon." "And Frederick?" She leaned closer. "They specifically asked for me to broker the deal. This could set us both up for life." Doris sat in her lawyer's office. Marcus Webb's report spread before them. "We need to warn him," her lawyer said. But Doris shook her head. He made his choice. He chose her over his family. The lawyer, an old family friend, leaned forward. "This isn't about your marriage anymore, Doris. If this woman is planning what we think she's planning, Frederick could lose everything. The team, his fortune, his reputation." After a long moment, Doris sighed. "Fine, set up a meeting, but I'm doing this for James. He deserves to have a father who isn't bankrupt and disgraced, even if that father is a fool." She gathered the papers, her resolve hardening. Abigail Leonard had destroyed her marriage, but she wouldn't let her destroy her son's future. Frederick was surprised when Doris requested to meet at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant in suburban Detroit. She arrived with James in a carrier, the baby sleeping peacefully. "We need to talk about Abigail," she said without preamble, sliding Webb's report across the table. As Frederick read, his face went through a series of transformations: disbelief, anger, fear. "This can't be real," he said finally. Doris's expression was calm. "Every word is verified. She's not after your heart, Frederick. She's after your team. And from what my investigator found, she's very good at getting what she wants. The The baby stirred, and Doris lifted him gently. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Frederick returned to his office in a rage, the investigator's report burning in his briefcase. He called Abigail, asking her to meet him immediately. She arrived within an hour, concern written on her beautiful face. "What's wrong?" she asked, closing the door behind her. He threw the report on the desk between them. "Abigail Thornton," he said coldly. "Chicago. Biotech. Corporate espionage." Her face went very still. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Abigail sat down, crossing her legs elegantly. "Well," she said finally, "I suppose the game is up." Her mask had dropped completely, revealing a calculating coldness that made Frederick's blood run cold. "You have to understand," Abigail said, her voice different now. Harder, more clinical. "This was never personal. You were a target, nothing more. The investment group I mentioned, they're very real, and they very much want your team. I was hired to make that happen." She stood, moving to the window. "The seduction was just the easiest path. Men like you are predictable, successful, middle-aged, married. You all want to feel young and desired again." Frederick felt sick. Every moment, every touch, every whispered word had been a lie. "How much?" he asked hoarsely. "How much were they paying you?" Abigail turned, a small smile playing on her lips. "10 million, plus a percentage of the sale. More than enough to disappear and reinvent myself again." She moved toward the door. "The offer stands, by the way. Sell them 30%, and everyone wins. Refuse, and well. Those photos from the victory celebration are quite damning." The photos arrived the next morning, high-resolution images of Frederick and Abigail in compromising positions. Some from the Super Bowl celebration, others from private moments he'd thought were secret. The accompanying note was simple: sell or see these on every news outlet in the country. "You have 48 hours. Frederick sat in his home office, head in his hands. He'd built his reputation over decades, and it could all be destroyed in minutes. The Lions organization would survive, but his personal brand, his legacy, would be forever tainted. His phone rang. "Doris." "I heard from my lawyer," she said. "Abigail's people contacted him too. They're threatening to name me in the scandal. Claim I knew about the affair. They want to destroy both of us if you don't comply." For the first time in months, Frederick and Doris worked together. They met with lawyers, investigators, and crisis management specialists. The threats had united them against a common enemy, though the chasm between them remained. "We can't let her win," Doris said during one late-night strategy session. "Not for us, but for James. This is his inheritance she's trying to steal." Frederick watched his wife. Brilliant, strategic, fierce in defense of their son. He remembered why he'd fallen in love with her in the first place. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for everything. You deserved better." Doris looked at him for a long moment. "Yes, I did. But right now, we need to focus on stopping her. We can deal with this later." Marcus Webb had been busy. Working with Frederick's legal team, he'd uncovered more about the mysterious investment group. "They're connected to organized crime," he reported. "Money laundering through sports franchises. The FBI has been watching them for years but couldn't get close enough. This might be our opportunity." Doris had an idea. "What if we let them think they're winning? Wire Frederick up, get them to incriminate themselves." It was dangerous, but it might be their only shot. Frederick agreed immediately. He owed Doris and James that much, to risk everything to protect what he'd built. The FBI was contacted discreetly, and suddenly their personal drama had become a federal investigation. Frederick met Abigail, at a downtown hotel, wearing a wire under his expensive suit. She was confident, believing she held all the cards. "Have you made your decision?" she asked, sipping champagne. "I need more time," Frederick said, playing his part. "This is my life's work. I can't just hand over 30%. Abigail leaned forward, her hand on his knee. Even knowing the truth, he felt the pull of her magnetism. "The photos go public tomorrow if you don't agree," she said softly. "Think about your son. Do you want him growing up with those images floating around the internet?" The threat to James made Frederick's blood boil, but he kept his expression neutral. "Tell me more about your employers," he said. "If I'm going to do this, I need to know who I'm getting into bed with." Perhaps it was overconfidence, or perhaps she simply enjoyed revealing her cleverness, but Abigail began to talk. She told him about the Chicago job, about others before that. "You were actually one of the easier marks," she said with a laugh. "So lonely in your perfect life, so eager for excitement. I almost felt bad about it. Almost." She detailed the structure of the deal, the offshore accounts, the ways they'd launder money through the team. FBI agents listened from a van outside, recording every word. Doris sat with them, her expression grim, as she heard the full extent of her husband's betrayal laid bare. But she also heard something else. Frederick's genuine disgust, his questions designed to draw out more information. He was trying to make this right, even if it was too late for them. "I'll need to meet your employers," Frederick said finally. "Face to face. If I'm risking everything, I want to know who I'm dealing with." Abigail hesitated. This wasn't part of the plan, but greed won out. "I can arrange that," she said. "Tomorrow night. But Frederick, if you're thinking of doing anything stupid, remember, I have those photos. And I have people watching your wife and son." The threat was a mistake. FBI agents noted it carefully. Conspiracy, extortion, threatening a minor. The charges were piling up. Frederick stood to leave, then turned back. "One more thing," he said. "Was any of it real? Any moment between us?" Abigail's smile was cold. "Oh, honey," she said, "I'm very good at my job. You felt what I wanted you to feel. Nothing more." The meeting was set for an abandoned warehouse near the Detroit River. It was almost too cliché, but criminals, Frederick was learning, often were. He arrived to find Abigail waiting with 3 men in expensive suits. They looked like businessmen, but there was something predatory in their eyes. "Mr. John," the apparent leader said with a slight Eastern European accent, "we've heard so much about you. Your team's victory was quite profitable for our betting operations." They laid out the terms. 30% for $2 billion, with certain concessions about player acquisitions and game strategies. It was worse than Frederick had imagined. They didn't just want to launder money, they wanted to fix games. FBI agents waited for the perfect moment, when money was discussed, when threats were made explicit, when the entire conspiracy was laid bare. The signal came from Frederick. "I need guarantees that my family will be safe." It was the code phrase. Suddenly, the warehouse was flooded with federal agents, weapons drawn, voices shouting commands. Abigail's face went white as she realized what had happened. She looked at Frederick with something like admiration. "You played me," she said, as agents cuffed her. The faithful husband routine, the guilt, it was all an act. Frederick shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "The guilt was real. But my family means more than your schemes." As they led her away, she called out, "Those photos still exist." But Frederick didn't care anymore. Let the world see his mistakes. He had more important things to worry about. The arrests made national news. Billionaire team owner helps FBI bust international crime ring. The photos Abigail had threatened him with seemed trivial compared to the story of corruption and extortion. Some outlets, published them. But public sympathy was surprisingly with Frederick, a man who'd been targeted by professional criminals and had risked everything to stop them. Doris watched the coverage from her sister's house, James sleeping in her arms. Her phone rang constantly, reporters wanting her story, friends offering support. She ignored them all. Frederick had done the right thing in the end, but it didn't erase the months of betrayal. She looked down at her son, his perfect features peaceful in sleep. "Your daddy is complicated," she whispered, "but he fought for you when it mattered." Frederick stood in his empty estate, the silence deafening. The FBI investigation was ongoing, but his part was done. Abigail and her associates were facing decades in prison. The Lyons were safe, his fortune intact. But none of it mattered without his family. He'd won the war, but lost what was most precious. He drove to Doris's sister's house, parking outside but unable to bring himself to knock. What could he say? That he was sorry, that he'd been a fool. The words seemed inadequate. As he sat there, the front door opened. Doris stood there, not inviting him in, but not sending him away either. "James needs to know his father," she said finally. "But that's all this is. Visits. Supervised at first. You broke us, Frederick. That can't be fixed with a heroic gesture every Tuesday and Thursday." Frederick visited his son. At first, Doris's sister supervised, watching him like a hawk. He learned to change diapers, to prepare bottles, to soothe James when he cried. It was harder than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. But slowly, he began to understand what he'd almost lost. James grew rapidly, his personality emerging, stubborn like his mother, intense like his father. He laughed for the first time during one of Frederick's visits, and the billionaire actually cried. Doris watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable. "He loves you," she said quietly. "Despite everything, he loves you." It was both a gift and a burden. That unconditional love from someone so innocent. 6 months after the FBI raid, Doris filed for divorce. The papers were delivered to Frederick's office, clinical and final. She wasn't asking for much. Child support, shared custody, a small property for her and James. Considering Michigan law and his wealth, she could have taken him for hundreds of millions. Her restraint was almost worse than greed would have been. Frederick signed without contesting anything. His lawyer protested, but Frederick silenced him. "She's the mother of my son, and the woman I betrayed. She can have whatever she wants." The divorce was finalized quietly, with minimal media attention. The public had moved on to new scandals. But for Frederick, the consequences of his choices remained, a constant reminder of the man he'd allowed himself to become. A year passed. The Lions defended their championship, but the victory felt hollow to Frederick. He threw himself into work and fatherhood, the two pillars that kept him standing. James was walking now, toddling between his parents during custody exchanges. The boy didn't understand why Mommy and Daddy lived in different houses, but he was loved in both. Doris had returned to work, taking a position with a non-profit focused on helping single mothers. She was good at it, her own experience lending authenticity to her advocacy. Sometimes Frederick watched her on local news, articulating the challenges faced by women whose partners had betrayed them. She never mentioned him by name, but he felt the weight of her words. Abigail's trial began on a cold December morning. Frederick was called as the star witness, facing the woman who had nearly destroyed his life. She looked smaller in prison clothes, her beauty dimmed by months of incarceration, but her eyes remained sharp, watching him with the same calculating gaze. His testimony was damning. He detailed every conversation, every threat, every moment of manipulation. The defense tried to paint him as a willing participant, a man who had chosen adultery and was now playing victim. But the FBI recordings told a different story. When Abigail was convicted on all counts, conspiracy, extortion, money laundering, she didn't react. She simply smiled at Frederick as they led her away, as if to say this was just another move in an endless game. On James's second birthday, both parents attended the party at a neutral location, a children's museum Doris had rented. They were cordial, united in celebrating their son, but the distance between them was palpable. Watching Doris help James blow out his candles, Frederick was struck by all he had lost. Later, as they cleaned up, Doris spoke to him directly for the first time in months. "I've been seeing someone," she said quietly. "A good man. He wants to meet James, but I wanted to tell you first." The words hit Frederick like a physical blow, but he kept his expression neutral. "If you trust him, I trust your judgment," he managed. She nodded, already moving away. The door to reconciliation, which he'd secretly hoped might remain cracked, had just closed completely. Doris's new boyfriend was everything Frederick wasn't. Steady, reliable. A pediatric surgeon who worked long hours but always made time for what mattered. Watching him interact with James during a custody exchange, Frederick felt a complex mix of emotions. Jealousy, certainly, but also relief. His son would have a positive male influence beyond weekend visits. "He seems like a good man," Frederick told Doris as they watched James play. "He is," she replied simply. "The kind of man I should have waited for in the first place." The words stung, but they were true. Frederick had been given a precious gift in Doris's love, and he'd thrown it away for an illusion. Now, another man would reap the benefits of his failure. The Lions continued to thrive under Frederick's ownership. He'd hired a new executive team, all thoroughly vetted, all chosen for competence rather than beauty. The Abigail scandal had made him notorious in NFL circles, but winning cured many ills. He was invited to speak at business schools about crisis management, turning his personal catastrophe into cautionary tales for future leaders. But success felt different now. Every victory was tinged with loss, every achievement shadowed by what it had cost. He'd proven he could build a championship team, but he'd failed at building a family. In quiet moments, he wondered which legacy would define him, the Super Bowl trophy or the divorce papers. Christmas arrived with Michigan's typical brutal cold. Frederick had James for Christmas Eve, transforming his estate into a winter wonderland. The boy squealed with delight at the decorations, the presents, the attention. For a few hours, Frederick could pretend this was normal, a father celebrating with his son. But when he drove James back to Doris on Christmas morning, reality reasserted itself. Through the window, he could see Doris's boyfriend helping prepare dinner, wearing a silly Christmas sweater, looking like he belonged. Frederick handed over his son and drove away, returning to his empty mansion where the decorations now seemed to mock him. He poured himself a drink and sat by the fireplace, wondering how many more holidays would pass this way. At his lawyer's suggestion, Frederick began seeing a therapist. Dr. Sarah Chen specialized in high-profile clients who had made spectacular personal mistakes. "Tell me about your childhood," she began in their first session. Frederick almost laughed. It seemed so cliché, but as weeks turned to months, he began to understand patterns he'd never recognized. His father had been a serial philanderer, his mother long-suffering and silent. He'd sworn he'd be different, but when tested, he'd fallen into the same trap. Abigail was a catalyst, Dr. Chen observed, but the capacity for betrayal was already there. The question is, what do you want to do with that knowledge? It was painful work, excavating the roots of his failures, but necessary if he ever hoped to be a better man for his son. 2 years after the divorce, Frederick was a different man. Therapy had helped him understand his patterns, his weaknesses, his capacity for self-destruction. He'd stopped drinking, started exercising again, found purpose beyond football and profit. He volunteered with youth sports programs, seeing in those kids echoes of what James might become. James was 4 now, a bright, energetic child who looked forward to his time with both parents. The custody arrangement had evolved into something more flexible, with Doris and Frederick communicating better about their son's needs. Her boyfriend, now fiancé, was part of the equation, but Frederick had made peace with that. James deserved all the love he could get. Doris married Dr. Michael Patt on a perfect spring day. Frederick wasn't invited, of course, but James excitedly told him all about it during their next visit. "Mommy was so pretty, Daddy. And Mike said I could call him Papa Mike if I wanted, but you're still my daddy, right?" Frederick's throat tightened. "Always, buddy. I'll always be your daddy." Later, looking at photos James had drawn of the wedding, Frederick felt an unexpected peace. Doris looked genuinely happy in a way she hadn't in their final years together. She deserved that happiness, that second chance at love with someone who would cherish her properly. His own second chance would have to take a different form. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Abigail had been killed in prison, stabbed by another inmate in what authorities called a dispute over contraband. Frederick felt nothing. No satisfaction, no sorrow, just a hollow recognition that a chapter of his life had closed definitively. She'd been sentenced to 25 years, but had served only 3. He didn't tell Doris immediately, but she found out anyway. "I'm sorry," she said during the next custody exchange. "I know it's complicated." He appreciated her empathy. "Even after everything." "She was a broken person who broke others," he said finally. "I hope she found peace. It was more grace than Abigail had ever shown anyone, but hatred was too heavy a burden to carry forever." 5 years after the divorce, Frederick found himself at Doris's door late one evening. Michael was working a night shift, and James was asleep. She let him in warily. "What's wrong?" she asked. He'd been carrying something for too long, and it was time to let it go. "I need to tell you everything," he said. "Not for forgiveness, just for truth. You deserve to know exactly how stupid I was, how completely I betrayed you." For 2 hours he talked about his feelings of inadequacy, his fear of becoming a father, how Abigail had played on every insecurity. Doris listened without interrupting, occasionally wiping away tears. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you," she said finally. "I needed to hear this. Not for closure, I found that already, but for understanding." James started kindergarten on a crisp September morning. Both parents attended, along with Michael, all 3 adults setting aside any awkwardness for the boy's big day. James wore his Lions jersey, a gift from Frederick, and carried a lunchbox Doris had carefully packed. He was nervous but excited, chattering about making new friends. As they watched him walk into the school, Doris slipped her hand into Michael's, but she also glanced at Frederick with something like compassion. They had created this amazing little person together, and despite all the pain between them, that bond remained. "We did good," she said quietly. Frederick nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. They had done good, at least in this one crucial way. By James's 6th birthday, Frederick had built the Lions into a dynasty. 3 Super Bowl victories in 5 years, a new stadium under construction, a legacy that would last generations. Sports Illustrated did a cover story on his redemption, how personal scandal had transformed him into a better leader. He gave interviews carefully, always acknowledging his mistakes without dwelling on them. But the real success was smaller, quieter. It was James running to him at every visit, arms outstretched. It was co-parenting successfully with Doris and Michael. It was the therapy sessions where he no longer felt broken, just human. He'd lost his marriage but found himself. And while he wouldn't have chosen this path, He was grateful for where it had led. "Daddy, why don't you and Mummy live together?" James asked one Saturday afternoon. He was 7 now, old enough to notice what other families looked like. Frederick had prepared for this question with Dr. Chen, but it still caught him off guard. He set down the football they'd been throwing and sat on the grass, patting the spot beside him. "Sometimes adults make mistakes," he said carefully. "I made some big mistakes that hurt your mom. We decided we could be better parents living apart than together. But we both love you more than all the stars in the sky." James considered this seriously. "Did you say sorry?" he asked. "Many times," Frederick assured him, "but some mistakes are too big for sorry to fix. The important thing is to learn from them." James nodded and picked up the football again, apparently satisfied. The simplicity of childhood forgiveness was both beautiful and heartbreaking. The Lions were retiring Frederick's number, not as a player, but as the owner who had transformed the franchise. It was an unusual honor, but the city loved him despite his personal scandals. At the ceremony, he was surprised to see Doris in the audience with James and Michael. She smiled at his shocked expression. James insisted, she explained afterward. He wanted to see his daddy get honored. "And you deserve this, Frederick. Whatever happened between us, you saved this team and this city's pride. I can acknowledge that." It was the most generous thing she'd said to him in years. As James ran to him, wearing a mini version of the jersey being retired, Frederick felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: completeness. 10 years had passed since Abigail walked into his life and tore it apart. Frederick stood in his office, looking out at the practice field where his team prepared for another season. He was 55 now, grey threading through his hair, lines carved by stress and time. The man who had fallen for a beautiful lie seemed like a stranger. James was 12, all gangly limbs and his mother's keen intelligence. He spent weekdays with Doris and Michael, weekends with Frederick. The arrangement worked, had become normal. Michael had proven to be an excellent stepfather, and Frederick had learned to be grateful rather than jealous. The boy was loved, stable, thriving. What more could he want? Sports dynasties don't last forever, and the Lions' run eventually ended. But Frederick had built something sustainable, a culture of excellence that would outlive his ownership. He'd begun thinking about succession, about what would happen to the team when he was gone. James had shown little interest in football operations, preferring science and mathematics like his stepfather. "You don't have to follow in my footsteps," Frederick told him one day. "The team will be yours if you want it, but you should choose your own path." James grinned. "Maybe I'll cure cancer instead," he said. "That's cool too, right?" Frederick ruffled his son's hair. "The coolest," he agreed, meaning it. His son didn't need to inherit his dreams or his mistakes. Doris called him on a random Tuesday. "I forgive you," she said without preamble. "I've been carrying this anger for too long, and I'm tired. I forgive you, Frederick. Not for you, but for me. And for James." He was speechless, sitting in his car outside the training facility. Thank you," he managed finally. "I don't deserve it." "No," she agreed, "you don't. But that's what makes it forgiveness instead of justice. We were good together once. That matters too." After she hung up, Frederick sat in silence for a long time. Forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation, didn't erase the past, but it lifted a weight he'd carried so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. James graduated middle school with honors, his proud parents and stepfather all in attendance. Watching him give the valedictorian speech, Frederick marveled at the young man his son was becoming. Thoughtful, kind, brilliant, the best parts of both his parents without the worst of their flaws. After the ceremony, as families mingled, Doris approached him. "He's applying to boarding schools," she said. "Science academies. He wants to go." The thought of James leaving Michigan made Frederick's chest tight, but he nodded. If it's what he wants, we support him. Both of us. She smiled sadly. Look at us, co-parenting like adults. Only took us a decade to figure it out. James chose a prestigious science academy in Massachusetts. The day before he left, he spent with Frederick. They went to a Lions game, ate at James's favorite restaurant, talked about everything and nothing. "I'll miss you, Dad," James said as they pulled up to Doris's house, "but I'll be home for holidays, and you can visit." Frederick hugged his son tightly. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Prouder than you'll ever know. Go change the world, kiddo." As James walked into the house, Frederick saw Doris watching from the window. She raised her hand in a small wave. Solidarity between parents losing their child to his own bright future. With James gone, Frederick found himself truly alone for the first time. The estate felt even larger, the silence more profound. He threw himself deeper into work and philanthropy, establishing a foundation for disadvantaged youth. But late at night, in the house that should have held a family, he confronted the life he'd chosen. He dated occasionally, age-appropriate women who understood his baggage. But nothing stuck. How could it? He compared every woman to Doris at her best, and to Abigail at her worst. Between those two extremes, he'd lost his ability to trust, to fully open his heart. Perhaps that was his penance, success in everything but love. The call came during Thanksgiving break. James, now 16, was home from school when Doris was diagnosed with breast cancer. Stage 2, treatable but serious. Frederick was at the hospital within an hour of hearing, old divisions forgotten in the face of crisis. "You didn't have to come," Doris said weakly from her bed. Michael was there, of course, holding her hand. "Yes, I did," Frederick said simply. "You're James's mother. You're—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "You're important." Over the following months, he helped however he could, driving James to visits, coordinating with doctors, ensuring Doris had the best care money could buy. It wasn't about lingering feelings. It was about doing right by someone who had deserved better from him. Doris beat cancer with the same strength she'd used to rebuild her life after divorce. Chemotherapy took her hair but not her spirit. Radiation exhausted her but didn't break her. Through it all, an unexpected support system emerged. Frederick and Michael working together, setting aside any awkwardness for her sake. "This is weird," she said one day, looking at both men sitting in her hospital room. "My ex-husband and my current husband. Playing nice." But she was smiling. Near-death experiences had a way of clarifying what mattered. Old grudges seemed petty compared to survival. James needed all his parents healthy and whole, and that's what they would give him. James graduated from the Science Academy as valedictorian, headed to MIT in the fall. The entire extended family attended. Doris healthy now, cancer in remission, Michael, Frederick, and various aunts, uncles, and cousins. It was the kind of gathering that might have been common if different choices had been made, but was precious for its rarity. In his speech, James thanked his village. "My mom, who taught me strength. My dad, who taught me that failure isn't final. My stepfather, who showed me that families can be built, not just born. I'm lucky to have all of you." Frederick wiped away tears, not caring who saw. His son had become a better man than he'd ever been, and that was the only legacy that truly mattered. 20 years after Abigail Leonard walked into his life, Frederick John stood at another crossroads. The Lions were being sold to a consortium he'd carefully vetted, legitimate businessmen who would honor the team's legacy. He was retiring at 60 with more money than he could spend in several lifetimes, but no one to spend it with. James was at MIT, working on revolutionary cancer treatments inspired by his mother's battle. Doris and Michael had moved to Florida, enjoying early retirement and each other. The scandal that had once defined Frederick's life was forgotten by everyone but him. He'd been given a second chance at fatherhood, if not at love, and he'd made the most of it. Standing in the empty owner's box one last time, Frederick reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. He'd lost a wife to gain wisdom. He'd fallen for a lie to learn truth. He'd destroyed a family to understand what family really meant. The stadium lights dimmed, and he walked out alone but not lonely. Some stories don't end with happily ever after. Sometimes they end with hard-won peace, and the knowledge that broken things, while never quite the same, can still be beautiful in their imperfection. The future stretched before him, uncertain but his own, and for Frederick John, billionaire, father and man, who'd learned the hardest lessons life could teach, that was enough. And that's the end of today's story. Now I want to hear from you. What lesson did this story leave with you? Drop your answer below. I can't wait to read them all. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our weekly stories. Until next time, stay blessed.